The following PowerPoint presentation is to accompany Personality, Chapter 8, Trait and Skill Aspects of Personality. Traits. The trait approach. The use of a limited set of adjectives or dimensions to describe and compare individuals. For thousands of years, from biblical times to Charles Darwin, individuals have been characterized using traits. However, it was Cattell who used statistical analyses to determine human traits. Factor analysis is a statistical technique. Factor analysis can help us to reduce or even eliminate the redundant information in a list of personality descriptors. Cattell endeavored to see if the same trait could be captured in different ways. For example, using questionnaire and life experience data. This approach to construct validation has been used frequently since then in assessing the validity of personality traits. Based on his factor analytic findings, Cattell proposed that there are 16 basic personality traits. Variability and consistency. Although behavior is variable, there is also a constant portion for each person. In other words, some invariant aspect of behavior accompanies the changing parts. It is this constant portion that is captured by the modern conception of traits. The notion of traits assumes that personality is rooted very much within the person. According to this view, each person has unique key qualities. Alport's idea of personality as the dynamic organization within the individual of those psychophysical systems that determine the characteristic behavior and thought is essential to the trait perspective. It sees personality as an organization within the individual. Functional equivalence. Functionally equivalent is Gordon Alport's concept that many behaviors of individuals are similar in their meaning because the individual tends to view many situations and stimuli in the same way. For Alport, the trait is the internal structure that causes this regularity. These consistencies are what form the basis for Alport's conception of personality. He analyzed these consistencies in terms of common traits and personal dispositions. Common traits. Common traits is the term used by Gordon Alport to describe organizing structures that people in a population share. Because people have a common biological heritage, and because people within a culture have a common cultural heritage, it makes sense to assume that people have in common many organizing structures, that is, traits. Alport thought people could usefully be compared on such dimensions, but he did not believe that such an analysis provides a deep understanding of personality. Alport accepts the Freudian idea that such motivation could have its origins in the childhood socialization of instinctual tendencies. However, in adulthood, these motives or strivings take on a life of their own. Functionally autonomous is a term used by Gordon Alport to describe the idea that in adulthood many motives and tendencies become independent of their origins in childhood, and that finding out where such tendencies originated is therefore not important. The childhood experiences may be the root or origin of the adult tendencies, but they do not continue to influence these tendencies. Proprium is Gordon Alport's term for the core of personality that defines who one is. Alport believed that the proprium has a biological counterpart. But by this, he meant that there are layers within the human psyche, including an irreducible core that defines who we are. Alport thought these core motivations were much more rational and positive than the Freudian approach described them. Consistent with Alport, no two people look exactly alike, So it should not be surprising that no two personalities are exactly alike. Personal disposition is a term used by Gordon Allport to describe a trait that is peculiar to an individual. Cardinal dispositions describe personal dispositions that exert an overwhelming influence on behavior. For example, Albert Schweitzer's relevance for life, or the Marquis de Sade's sexual cruelty. Central dispositions describe the several personal dispositions around which personality is organized, fundamental qualities that can succinctly portray an individual. For example, central dispositions are qualities that a professor would mention in writing a letter of recommendation for a student. A contemporary trait approach. The Big Five. The Big Five is the trait approach to personality that is supported by a great deal of research and suggests personality can be captured in 5 dimensions. The first one is openness, or openness to experience, culture, or intellect. And this is the personality dimension that includes imagination, wit, originality, and creativity. People low on this dimension are shallow, plain, and simple. Open people are also artistic. Conscientiousness, or the lack of impulsivity, is the personality dimension that includes dependability, cautiousness, organization, and responsibility. People low in this dimension are impulsive, careless, disorderly, and undependable. Conscientious people are also persevering. Extroversion, or surgency, is the personality dimension that includes enthusiasm, dominance, and sociability. People low on this dimension are considered introverted. Extroverted people also tend to be energetic and talkative. Introverted people tend to be shy, retiring, submissive, and quiet. Agreeableness is the personality dimension that includes friendliness, cooperation, and warmth. People low in this dimension are cold, quarrelsome, and unkind. Agreeable people are also trusting. And finally, neuroticism, or emotional instability, is the personality dimension that includes nervousness, tension, and anxiety. People low in this dimension are emotionally stable, calm, and contented. Neurotic people also tend to be high-strung, moody, and worrying. How was the Big Five model developed? Well, this model emerged from extensive factor analyses of the adjectives used to describe personality, and from equally extensive factor analyses of various personality tests and scales. Note that the Big Five approach to personality is mostly research-driven, rather than theory-driven. It is an inductive approach to personality, which means that the theory emerges from the data. If the data are not collected in a careful and comprehensive manner, then the results are of limited validity. Factor analysis reduces the observed characteristics into a smaller number of dimensions. In reducing to one dimension, we usually lose some information, and some people do not fit the pattern as well as others. But overall, we gain simplicity and parsimony, that is, economy. Are the Big Five traits really there? There can be hypothetical constructs that represent something that is really there, even if we are not yet sure exactly what that something is. Many researchers believe that the biologically based origins of the Big Five will eventually be found. The Big Five dimensions derive mostly from lexical approaches to traits. In other words, people, either naive raters or professional psychologists, have described and tested and categorized others, and these ratings have been reduced to 5 dimensions. The problem with this is that the raters may be wrong because either they see things that are not really there, or by missing or not seeing things that are really there. Research using behavioral genetic and other biological approaches confirms that it makes sense to say there is biological evidence for a small number of dimensions, although somewhat greater or lesser numbers of basic dimensions are not precluded by these analyses. Cross-cultural research generally confirms the utility of 5 or so dimensions, as does research in populations of young and old, educated and uneducated. Career pathways and other important outcomes. Do the Big Five have useful applications in understanding people's career paths? Well, extroverts, with their enjoyment of others, boldness, energy, ambition, and yes, big mouths, tend to be successful as politicians and other high-visibility leaders. People scoring high on conscientiousness seem to do well at work, especially in corporate settings. Their persistence, responsibility, and strong sense of purpose help them accomplish goals and secure their boss's admiration. And they do well in college. People high in agreeableness are likely to be altruistic, involved in helping others. They may be fine leaders of non-profit organizations, members of the clergy, or perhaps good moms and dads. Neurotics, who may be anxious, tense, and fretful, can move in one of 2 main directions, either channeling their worrying into a kind of compulsive success, or else letting their anxiety lead them into recklessness. And finally, people high in openness tend to be creative and to value aesthetic and intellectual pursuits. And because they seek a wide range of experiences, they may be artists or writers. More than 5? Fewer than 5? In the view of Allport and others, certainly more than 5 trait dimensions are needed to characterize each individual. The Big Five are meant to be used in analyses when the same dimensions are applied across individuals. But are 5 dimensions enough for summarizing common traits? Well, this question cannot yet be answered. The reason, again, is that there is no compelling or comprehensive theory that explains why 5 dimensions are sufficient to capture what we need to know when comparing and contrasting individuals. Despite progress in understanding the Big Five, Cattell continued to assert that 16 general personality factors are essential. And interestingly, even proponents of the Big Five generally find it expedient to turn to additional trait descriptions to describe personality fully. A facet within the Big Five trait approach is the component characteristics, also sometimes called subfactors, that underlie each of the Big Five factors. However, Eysenck believed that there were fewer than 3, suggesting the Big Three were based on biological systems and temperament. These Big Three included extroversion, neuroticism, and psychoticism. Closely related to traits, but distinct from them, are motives. Motives are internal psychological forces that help induce particular behavior patterns. Motives involve a goal, which are needs, drives, and emotions that are all related to motives. Basic needs include needs for achievement, affiliation, dominance, and exhibition. Need for achievement. People with a high need for achievement are persistent and even driven to succeed on tasks that society sets out for them. They may obtain a string of college degrees or a shelf of awards. They tend to rise to the top in business, especially if quantity is more important than quality, or if shrewdness or persistence can lead to triumph. However, they may be less successful once skills of diplomacy or cooperation become more important to the job. Need for affiliation. People with a high need for affiliation want to come together and spend time with other people. It prompts people both to have friends and to please their friends in order to maintain the friendship. Such people are extroverted because they seek the stimulation of other people. They are agreeable because they want to act friendly, and they are conscientious because they are dependable. People with a high power motivation naturally seek positions and offices that allow or invite them to assert control over others. They like to usurp the leadership of small groups, accumulate possessions, and control territory, although they may be quarrelsome and somewhat insecure. They are more motivated to gain money and influence. Need for exhibition. People high in this need want to show themselves before others and amuse, entertain, excite, or even shock others. They are colorful, spellbinding, noticeable, dramatic, and showy. This is usually studied through a focus on their expressive style. Expressive style. Emotional expressiveness. An individual likely has typical ways of expressing or inhibiting feelings like anger or joy. Perhaps the most significant individual dimension of style is overall expressiveness. People vary in the intensity, expansiveness, animation, and dynamism of their nonverbal and verbal behaviors. The expressiveness can be measured and defined as the ease with which people's emotions can be read from their expressive behaviors, even when they are not trying deliberately to communicate their feelings to others. Such people are often uninhibited or charismatic. Expressive people are often perceived as more attractive than unexpressive people. Extroversion is the trait that is most readily seen in expressive style. Other traits of social importance, such as affiliation, exhibition, dominance, nurturance, and playfulness, also seem to be closely tied to nonverbal expressive cues. Dominant people also have more expansive gestures, walk at the front of the line or parade, and sit in the front row or at the head table. Expressive people grab attention, and they may inspire or activate the expressive behavior of other people.